Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is among several senior White House officials who say Qasem Soleimani's death is in the best interests of U.S. national security. But others in the administration have reportedly questioned the president's rationale and how he made the decision to order the strike in the first place, as was just discussed. Joining us now from Bulgaria is New York Times foreign correspondent Rukmini Callimachi. And thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Let's go straight to your reporting here, and I'll read the title, and Aaron was alluding to it. As tension with Iran escalated, Trump opted for most extreme measure. As is typical in these situations, as you know so well here, Rukmini, is that the president receives these white papers, these suggestions. He has options, A, B, C, we'll just say. And then he selects, based on that, the odds, the data that he has. And you're reporting that he selected something that was more severe than the other options. Is that right?
That's right. So a couple days after Christmas, which was when the rocket attack occurred that ended up killing the American contractor in Iraq, President Trump was given a menu of options where the killing of Soleimani was described as the most far out extreme option. At that point in time, he did not choose that course. What happened next was a series of strikes against bases allied with Iranian proxies. But a couple of days after that, when there was the attack on the wall of the U.S. Embassy, President Trump, according to our reporting, was fuming in his office, was very upset, and suddenly he landed on what people around him and officials who have spoken to us described as a really extreme course of action.
In your reporting here, how close to the inner circle were these sources, of course, without you giving out those sources' names?
It's hard for me to answer that question, Richard. This is reporting by myself and by several colleagues at the New York Times who have confirmed basically the same thing, which is that this was considered something that was very on the edge, very extreme in terms of the way forward.
You've heard from the administration, and in your reporting you've dug into it, but we've heard from the administration, from not only the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, as well as President Trump, that this was to avert an imminent attack, an imminent action that was about to happen from or led by Iranians. What was that imminence? What was the information behind that imminent attack?
The sources that my colleagues and I have spoken to, who have been briefed on this matter, who have had access to the classified information, say that the intelligence indicating that this was imminent was thin at best. One official I spoke to described it as razor thin. In fact, what the president was presented was a couple of things. Number one, Soleimani had been traveling in the region in Iraq, in Syria, and also in Lebanon, meeting proxies of Iran that are known to have a confrontational relationship with U.S. and its interests. Secondly, very importantly, there was a conversation between the general and the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, in Iran that was intercepted, and in which you hear the general asking for the supreme leader's blessing for a major operation. But crucially, the supreme leader said, no, you know what? I want you to come to Tehran for further consultations. So that in and of itself indicates that whatever operation there was, whether it was aimed at U.S. interests or not, had not yet been approved by the supreme leader of Iran. And that conversation was at least a week before Soleimani's death. So it seems to be a reach to say that there was an imminent attack planned.
Now that we're looking forward here, Rukmini, what do you expect based on what the Ayatollah had suggested from your reporting and your sources here to Soleimani in advance of his killing? And what does that mean going forward in terms of what this Ayatollah will do now in his 80s, right? He has been leading for about 3 decades.
Well, I mean, that's one of the difficult scenarios here, which is that really the ball is in the Ayatollah's court. He needs to decide how he's going to react to this, and it seems to me to be implausible that they would not react. This is such a major such a major provocation, if you will, the killing of Soleimani, the #2 leader in this country. A couple of other things going forward. I cover ISIS full time at the New York Times, and just today, the coalition has announced that they are calling off for now. They're pausing the fight against ISIS in Iraq because they need to use resources to protect the embassy and to protect military compounds throughout the country. So that has a secondary effect. ISIS, yes, has been pushed back, but that kind of action is bound to help the group in its attempts to rebuild.
We also have the Iraqi parliament saying the United States forces must get out. The timeline is to be determined. Also, the president needing to sign that. The president there in Iraq is what I'm alluding to, and most likely that will happen. How does this all come together when we talk about international security in the region and what's going forward? Big question, I know, and difficult to answer in one question, but if you can, Rukmini.
I think that it's clear that for American citizens in the region, this is not a good time. The U.S. Embassy has already announced that American citizens in Iraq should evacuate immediately by any means that they can, and that is not just in Iraq, but also in Syria and Lebanon, in places where Iran has its proxies. Now, whether the homeland is going to be under any kind of physical attack seems unlikely to me, but definitely I would say that Americans traveling overseas are at a heightened risk.
And quickly, 15 seconds, moderates now, are they moving towards an extreme there in Iraq and Iran? What moderates may have been?
Well, I think one of the disappointing aspects of this scenario is that there was a long held tussle between America and Iran for influence inside Iraq. Just recently, in the last couple of months, we have seen protests in the streets of Baghdad, where protesters have come out against Iran, against the Iranian influence there. Whatever the actions that the U.S. has taken has now essentially reversed that, where now Iran is being seen as the victim. They're being seen as the party that has been wronged, and that is not in favor of American interests in the region.
Can't thank you enough for your reporting, as always, Rukmini, and for taking the time as you are traveling through Bulgaria. New York Times foreign correspondent Rukmini Callimachi, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Breaking news also this hour here on MSNBC in East Africa. One U.S. service member and 2 Department of Defense contractors are among those killed after al-Shabaab extremists overran a key military base in Kenya. Now, the base we're talking about is used by U.S. counterterrorism forces. It's the first known al-Shabaab attack against U.S. forces in Kenya. Kenya's military says 5 attackers were killed. Leaders from the extremist group say the assault has nothing to do with the current situation in the Middle East. Let's go to NBC News White House correspondent Hans Nichols. And Hans, what do we know about this?
Well, AFRICOM is saying that the attack was repelled. Unclear to what extent these assaults from al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist group that's affiliated with al-Qaeda, actually penetrated the compound. There are about 100 U.S. service personnel there. They use this as a base in northern Kenya, in part to go after al-Shabaab in Somalia. Remember, al-Shabaab has done some vicious damage in the last few weeks. 79 were killed in that bomb blast in downtown Mogadishu. It is a complicated situation there, and for a long time you've had a very weak central government in Somalia facing what is increasingly a sophisticated organization in al-Shabaab. They've even used examples of bracketing in U.S. service members with artillery, potentially even flooding planes to get closer to causing damage. There have been a handful of deaths in East Africa on this. This is probably the second largest, I think the largest death total we have in Africa, at least in the last, since the initial Black Hawk Down in the 90s, was in Niger, when those 4 U.S. service members were caught, those Green Berets, and were caught in an awful situation. So here we have 3 dead, 1 U.S. service member, and 2 contractors. It is a reminder, though, that there are a lot of dangerous extremist groups out there. This is not affiliated with the Quds forces or any Hezbollah-type association. And it's a reminder that, as they say at the Pentagon, Richard, the enemy gets a vote. Richard?
All right, Hans, always good to have you on these stories. NBC's Hans Nichols there in Florida with the president actually today. Thank you so much.